Good morning. We will, it's about 9:01 a.m. We will call the Community Development Committee to order. Madam Chair, you can call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
All right, we move to item 4, approve the minutes from the March 2nd meeting. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
It's been moved. Have a second. All right, we have a second from Mr. Jones. Any question? Anything? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
One abstain. 3 ayes, 1 abstention. All right, item 5, matters referred to the committee. We have none. We do have item number 6, presentations. If we have no objections from the members of the committee, we would like to swap the housing study to come up first, and then we will go into the Cuyahoga County Property Demolition Fund. Is that okay with the committee? All right. We meet again. We walked in together this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Glenn Coyne, Executive Director of County Planning Commission. Appreciate the opportunity to come before you this morning and brief you on the status of our countywide housing study. And anywhere I go and talk about something we're working on, I like to remind people of what we're about at the Planning Commission, and that is to inform and provide services to both the communities of our county and also other county departments and to the council and county as a whole. So we've got lots of projects going on right now, and one of the ones we're most excited about is this housing study that we've been working on. So I'm going to briefly go through these 4 elements, give you a little bit of background, tell you what the principles are, what our process has been to date, and what it will look like in the future, and then where we are right now and some sample data for you. Just to remind you, the County Council appropriated the money for this housing study in the FY15 general fund budget for the Planning Commission. And again, you'll recall that this came out of interest generated by the discussion that related to the demolition bond that was issued also by County Council. So our Planning Commission took this up at the first opportunity they had this year, which was their first meeting on March 12th, and approved a resolution so that we go ahead and get the study going. Mostly it's led by our staff. Jim Sonhalter is here with me today. He's our manager of our planning services, and we also have a bunch of our other planning staff that are working on this. We also subcontracted with Cleveland State. Their research, we realized that they had an enormous amount of data already pulled together. They're doing a lot with the demolition program through the county already, and so we thought it would be a good idea to bring them in to assist us with some of the research, and that's turned out to be a really good relationship. And we're also been closely coordinating with the county's Department of Development, and you'll hear more about that later. So a little bit of background, what is the problem? Why are we looking at this? Obviously, the county's housing market is going through a period of restructuring. There's many causes, I've listed them there. On the left side of the screen, net loss in population, decline in income, our population is aging. There's just fewer homeowners out there, housing costs are increasing, and folks are displaying a different sense of their preference in housing location and choice. So what's resulted in is a real oversupply of units, and it's not really well matched to what we think the demand is out there for housing. So what are we going to do with our study? We hope at the end to provide a roadmap and some tools that the communities can use to identify some things that they can do and implement at the local level to help reshape housing. Again, we're the Planning Commission, we're doing the study, we're hoping to provide them with the tools that they need to move forward. What will they do? We're not sure yet, we haven't gotten to that point, but we hope that it will target some of the conditions I just talked about, some of the causes of why we have this housing issue, and then what issues each local community has to face to address those. We'll have options. I don't think, as I say at the bottom, one size will fit all. We have 59 different communities. We have lots of different issues in each different jurisdiction. So we're going to have a menu of things and options for folks to choose from that would work best for them. We just don't think that we can put together one set of issues and say this is what you should adopt to address it. So as we got going, we've been thinking about 3 guiding principles to help us focus our research. One is new construction where it's warranted. Second is rehabilitation where it's feasible. And finally, demolition where necessary. And I think this just makes us look at each available option as opposed to one or two, or not thinking about where we might look at new construction or rehabilitation in the future. So what are we doing? And there's really a 5-step process that we're going through. And right now we're sort of through the second phase, as you'll see on the calendar here. But first of all is collecting a lot of demographics. We're trying to compare where we are with national and regional trends in terms of households and population and units. We're also trying to see what our trends are in home ownership. And then we want to try to look at national data to see how we fit in with national trends. And there's some interesting findings there. And also, most importantly, is try to predict the future. What are the demographics of the county going to look like as we go forward? Again, it's a very data-driven process for us to collect the information, both the supply and demand. And then one very important aspect of what we're working on has to do with affordable housing. Not only do we need to see what the supply and the demand is overall, but we also need to take a look at what the affordability issues are and what the mismatch is between the supply and the demand of housing when you take into account affordability. Next, we'll be moving into phase 3, which will take a look at an actual market analysis. We want to see what tracts in the county, census tracts in the county, are exhibiting some positives. We want to see if there's clusters of things that are happening both on the positive and the negative side. That will also lead us into taking a look at what other investments are happening. What investments are happening with transit? Where are highways being improved? Where is employment seeing some gains? So we can really see how these other investments impact the housing market. And then one of the things that we are really good at doing at the Planning Commission is keeping up with all the community's master plans. We're updating 5 community master plans right now, so we're intimately involved in those. We've done many others over the years. But the idea is, what is each city putting in their plans that they'd like to target for investment and redevelopment, especially in this case in housing. Then what we're going to take a look at is some cost estimates for construction, demolition, and rehab. And these will be general, of course, and they will be provided, again, for that toolbox that we want to provide at the end, so that folks will have a good idea about what they're faced with if they're trying to make these selections between construction, demolition, and repair. And I think a lot of that data has already been out there. The Land Bank has done a real good job of that, but we'll lay that out as part of the toolkit. Also, we'll identify what some of the barriers are, why folks are having a hard time getting into housing. Is it financing? Is it affordability of the units? Is it supply of the type of home they want? And then finally, of course, we'll highlight which areas are demolition candidates and where demolition will improve the surrounding property values. And then finally, we will pull it all together by looking at best practices and laying out some strategies and some policies, and try to figure out where can we reuse some vacant land, where are there pockets of affordability that should be built upon. Then we want to look at where we can take some of the best practices that we've identified and which communities are they best applied for. Where are some of the cities ready to implement some of those best practices. And then county has a whole lot going on already, as you know, between the block grant and other investments that they're making in housing. So we want to make sure that we review those and see if they're hitting their targets as well. And then I've been before you just recently to provide you with an update on our place-based economic development plan. And we really need to figure out a way to tie this housing study into the work that we're doing in the place-based economic development, because there we really did look at the whole county and which areas have strengths and which areas have certain advantages, whether it's population, employment, transit access, highway access, rail, whatever the positives that might be going on. We think that housing could build off of those that we've identified in the economic development strategy, so the two can work hand in hand. So what's going to happen next? We're hoping to finish this study up in the next 5 months. We are on schedule with what we laid out. Again, I mentioned it's very data-driven. We're focusing at the Planning Commission on the analysis, finding out what some of those best practices are, and as I just mentioned, how it might tie into some other planning that we're doing for economic development. What we'll do then is work closely and hand it over to the Department of Development, and they're the ones through their housing deputy housing director, who you're going to hear from in just a minute. They're going to focus more on the policies and what specific recommendations can happen for the county to take to implement the housing plan. So we're looking at more as providing the toolkit, the best practices, the research background, and not so much getting into countywide policies and countywide recommendations. So I just wanted to let you know very quickly some highlights of what we've found. Again, this problem is not a new issue. In 1990, we already had 40,000 housing units in surplus in the county. So the problem has only gotten worse as we've gone forward because our population has gone down. The number of households has gone down, and ownership has become a bigger challenge. So now we have an even bigger issue with available housing units, but it's not something that happened just because of the lending crisis or the recession. It was something that we were already looking at as far back as 1990. Some of that stems from migration out. It's well documented that folks are leaving the center city and going to the suburbs. We are now starting to see a little bit of a reverse of that, with downtown seeing a lot of, downtown Cleveland seeing a lot more population growth. But looking at the overall trends between Cuyahoga and the surrounding 6 counties, there's a very clear trend of population moving out of the center city into the suburbs. And again, this data is between 1990 and 2010. So there's been another 5 years of experience that we don't have census data for, but we have some estimates of some things that are starting to show some differences. With that, obviously, there's a huge economic impact to folks leaving Cuyahoga and going into adjacent counties. And the data that we've been able to find so far estimates that between 92 and 2011, that's totaled $3.6 billion of income. So that's real money. That's money that affects everything that Cuyahoga County is trying to do. And it's something that we need to take a look at how to turn around. And then, unfortunately, looking forward at projections to 2040, I wish I had better news, but the trend is expected to continue for Cuyahoga County with a decrease in population. If 2015 is the benchmark where we are right now, you can see our neighboring counties are going up. Ohio as a state is going up just slightly. And then our region is declining a little bit, and then Cuyahoga County is declining even more than that. That's if current trends continue. So again, I know that was a quick background of what we're doing and how we're doing it. I think copies of the presentation were left at your place for you to keep, and I would certainly encourage you to take a look at it, ask questions, even after today, if there's anything that comes to mind. But with that, I'd be happy to try to answer questions.
Well, thank you so much for the update about the housing study. You know, as we continue to move forward and develop plans to deal with housing moving forward, this is going to be a critical piece in doing that. We'll open up the 2 questions from our committee. Yes, Mr. Brady.
Good morning. I was, of course, listening to your presentation, and I was thinking, you show statistics, information, data going back to 1990, about 25 years ago, and I remember at that time that there was a lot of discussion about what was called sprawl then. A lot of water under the bridge in 25 years. A lot of things have happened. But a lot of people were well aware of outmigration, and even then, as if it were, in the last century or something, it was obvious that a lot of people were choosing to move to the surrounding suburbs for a variety of reasons. This is not obviously something unique to Cuyahoga County and Cleveland. It's something that we see repeated all over the country, and particularly this part of the country, older cities and, let's say, newer outer ring suburbs, whatever you want to call them. I am looking forward to your study being completed, but do you have any? We certainly must have learned something more, before we started this study about not only what causes the problems, but what might be done, if anything, to reverse them. So I was wondering if you might be able to just comment on what, cumulatively people in this field have been able to determine, find out, surmise, before we just see you again in 6 months. And
Well, Councilman, I think the biggest issue is jobs. If you look around the nation where employment is steady or growing, you're seeing places that are more stable or they're growing. So that seems obvious, but we've got to find ways to increase employment, I think, and that's why the economic development piece of this is so critical, and it's combined. The other thing we're seeing around the country, and that's why we want to bring in the best practices and some of the things that we see other places doing. Folks are, the outer counties don't have a metro parks. They don't have RTA. They don't have some of the other amenities, and other center cities around the country are seeing the same thing. They have investments in infrastructure that we think that the next generations are going to be searching for. It's less and less attractive to move farther and farther out, and it's becoming more attractive to move closer to the center city for those amenities. So we think there's an opportunity to certainly take advantage of those types of things. I think we have the lake, we have the airport, we have a lot of different assets that I think that Cuyahoga County can certainly begin to take advantage of. The idea is, how do we make that happen? How do we increase the employment so that people can afford a house and have the type of house that they want? The other thing is the supply. It's a very interesting market for housing supply here. It's primarily single-family detached housing, and there's a lot of parts of the country who have done other styles of housing, townhomes, more cluster, more density, where people don't want a great big yard, they want a smaller yard. But so there's some demand and supply issues with the type of housing supply that we have in the county. It's just a reality of how we developed. At the time the county developed before 1960, most of the houses were built as single-family detached homes, and some of the next wave of growth that we think is going to come in, and folks looking for housing, that may not be the type that they're ultimately looking for. So we have to think about that.
well, Mr. Chairman, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I agree with what you think people should like, the amenities and the other things that you mentioned. A lot of them have always been here, of course. If people were interested in them, and I'd not. I don't want to seem negative or hopeless, but these things, and I'm for them, seem to be fairly incremental. Hoping that the next generation of people is going to choose a different lifestyle than their predecessors is. I'm not sure what that's based on. I hope it's true, but I'm not sure what it's based on. If it's based on just a guess, I'm not sure it's a plan. And it seems to me that as far as I can tell, there are always people who are interested in living the way that you've discussed. People might be enticed to be interested in living. But it seems to be that there's still as there has been for decades, a plurality of people who want bigger houses, more property, and I think that's a much stronger current all across the country than the reversal, than people making other choices, and that's not meant to. You understand what I mean, and so I just think that we should be realistic about what we can expect in terms of changing people's behavior. That's all I'm trying to say. Thank you.
I agree.
Ms. Simon?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for moving fast on this. I really appreciate it. This is critical to our county, and what we're seeing is trends. Did anything surprise you at this stage of the game, or is it just a question of quantifying what you already knew or the Planning Commission knew was the status of the county and housing?
No, nothing's really surprised us yet. Well, I don't think we're far enough into it to be surprised, but it's a massive issue, and the numbers are big, and I wish they were better. As Council President Brady said, it's been going on for a really long time, and we need to try to find a way to address it. And it's not just a Cleveland issue. It's not just an inner ring suburb issue. It's the entire county. And that is something that I think if we start working in some of the outer communities, we're starting to, we're seeing that their values are down too. Their rate of ownership is changing too. So I think that's one thing that maybe is a little bit unexpected, is that this is truly extending to all corners of the county.
So do you see, I understand you're not creating the policy, but policies at this stage of the game, similar to Portland with the smart growth and those types of policies now to come in, it's really about investment, I think, not only jobs, but where do we put our resources? And that comes from the state. Most of all got us into this mess, I think, at least, and a lot of the problem came from where ODOT was making roads and going out into, virgin territory instead of investing in infrastructure. So are there policies similar to smart growth that you see as we connect to that economic place-based plan you're working on, somehow to be able to rein in our resources to stimulate and entice the movement back in, to reverse the trends? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you think at this stage of the game those types of policies would work? And
Well, try to be non-political here. As the planning director for Cuyahoga County, yes, we should invest as much as we can in Cuyahoga County. As I mentioned earlier, we have the assets to build off of, and those investments are being made, I think. We are underdeveloped in terms of transit-oriented development, for example. We don't have a lot of development around our transit stations like we could. It's starting to happen. You're starting to see some examples of that, but that's one example. I think the folks over at NOACA are spending a lot of time thinking about how to prioritize the investments in the 5-county region, and there's very much an attitude of we should fix it first before we go out and build new, and I think that that's going to favor investment in Cuyahoga County. But we are in a bigger region. We're the center of the region, and I would agree with you that we should take a look at how those investments impact how we grow. So some of the policies to answer your question, I do think the policies and recommendations will get into, it has to. We can't just talk about housing in a vacuum. It has to be related to transportation, economic development, and all the others too.
And one final statement, at least, I'm looking at investment within Cuyahoga County and how do we invest there to, what I envision with this plan is to take place-based assets in the county around housing to be able to really strategize where it's best to invest our demo money. And is it going to be around transit? Is it going to be around, are there opportunities for green space or different types of housing clusters and different types of strategy within the county? So I want to be sure that, we're not looking at the Northeast Ohio region, but within the county itself, and really know how to put our money, which is limited, relative to the need. So that's all. Hopefully we can say maybe in Dave Greenspan's area, it makes sense to grow around the industrial section there, but maybe in South Euclid, let's grow with our green sustainable housing plan there. And that's what I kind of want to see, what's working, what's not working, where's best to put the money and grow on, this, but that's not only us as a county compared to our neighbors, but within the county, and to be smart about that, which I know you are.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, Mr. Corn.
Morning.
You mentioned 5 partners that that you're working with, cities that have master plans. Who are those 5 cities, and is Cleveland one of those 5?
No, Councilman, the city has their own planning department, economic development, community development, so they handle their own planning, usually on a ward or neighborhood by neighborhood basis. So the 5 communities we're helping this year are Beechwood, Olmsted Falls, Parma Heights, Cleveland Heights, and University Heights. So it's a mix of inner and outer.
And you mentioned again, this is an issue that's bigger than just focusing simply on housing and in that silo. Are you partnering, even though Cleveland has their own master plan? Obviously, they are central to this conversation. If we're looking to encourage people who have taken flight out of the urban area and encourage them to come back in some way, as you mentioned, the downtown areas, what partnerships, what relations do you have with the city of Cleveland with the study, if any?
No, absolutely. The city's included in the study, their data. Some of their programs will show up as best practices in the study. We work very closely with their city planning department on many different initiatives. And there are a lot of examples where there's planning that's going on that's on the border of Cleveland and a first-ring suburb, and we're usually involved with those discussions too. And one example is TLCI that's going on, Transportation for Livable Center study on East 185th, and that includes Cleveland and City of Euclid, and that process is moving through the planning phase. And that's not only for that corridor, but for the neighborhoods on either side of it, which encompass the City of Cleveland and Euclid. So that's just one example, but we work very closely with them, and I think the data that primarily we're getting from Cleveland State will include all of the City of Cleveland data as well.
Do you anticipate the city adopting any of the findings of the study? And
I wouldn't anticipate yes or no. I don't know.
okay, do you have a timeline? And you've given us a timeline, but for the study's completion, do we expect it near the end of this year?
We are. We're shooting for December. We think we can hit that mark.
Okay. And my last set of questions. In your presentation, you mentioned when you get to the best practice and policy stage, which we aren't at just yet, but developing practices and programs and policies in the weaker markets, and it says identifying ways to tie the housing study to the place-based economic development. Do you have, again, we certainly have to do a study first, but do you have any theories and ideas on what the study might find and what some of those potential policies might be to impact the weaker markets?
Well, I don't. I just think we're going to have to be very realistic about the projections of the supply and the demand and where those go and how much land we really need to have available for future housing, whether it's cluster, townhome, single family, apartments, whatever scale it might be at. I think we need to be very realistic when we're doing our master plans in our communities and the city of Cleveland to think about how much land we're devoting to housing and how much land we should be devoting to housing. And I think there's going to be some policies that come out of this that we may have too much land that we're holding for housing that we're probably not going to need for housing. So what do we do with that land? Does it become open space? Does it become economic development for commercial or retail or manufacturing? Does it become an area where we can handle stormwater? Does it become an area where there's transportation improvements? I mean, there's many different things, but I think the bottom line is, do we need X acres devoted to housing looking ahead to 2040? And I think that that's where some of the policies are going to come down to say, where are their strengths, where are their not strengths, and how do we address that? I think you saw in the presentation we did on place-based economic development, there's certainly some areas and corridors and places we want to focus on. And unfortunately, there's areas that didn't show up on that map. But the idea is we have to make some choices about how we reserve land for each different kind of land use in the future. And I think that's where some of this is going to hit the policy section. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure if it really did, but
You have. And last, I'll just throw out, I grew up in one of the weaker markets. And as a child, I remember just the small businesses that were around my home, many small businesses throughout the 70s and late 60s, 70s. And they were part of that flight. When given the opportunity, those small businesses, their families moved out into the outer areas. And again, how do you start to bring them back? It's always been my hope and belief that those mixed housing, income housing businesses started to come back. People who lived where their businesses are located. I lived in one myself growing up. So I think that's part of the solution. Good businesses, strong businesses, good housing, good school systems, certainly bigger than our study and bigger than we will biting doing our part. The overall solution is bigger than the part we will play. But if place-based economic is part of the solution, looking at those small businesses and having individuals being able to create an opportunity for someone to literally live in a weaker market and live where their business, it's a very small aspect, but I think it's a fundamental part of the overall solution.
agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do we have any more questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for coming this morning, presenting us with the information that you've come up with so far, and we look forward to the other phases of your housing study. Thank you.
And please let me know if you'd like me to come back for an update on as we move further through.
Absolutely, that was sort of my thought. We'll talk with the clerk afterwards and pull that together.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now move into our second session of presentations, will be the Cuyahoga County Property Demolition Fund. Chrissy, are they all set up? We'll ask Department of Development come up first, Paul Herdick and Kim Surratt, to start us off, and then we'll move right into the Cuyahoga County Land Bank after that.
Good morning, Ken Surratt, Department of Development. Just briefly before I start talking about demolition, I think it's important to say that, this is part of our overall housing plan. This is a piece, a tool, I think as Glenn mentioned before. So I believe that any future policies, recommendations that we have will very closely, again, as he mentioned, are going to be tied to the study as well as the economic development work that he's doing as well, so that we can have a very coordinated strategy and policies that make sense for our county and for each municipality, to your point, within it. So with that, just here to give an update on the current status of our demolition program. A quick agenda. I'm going to recap a little bit about the legislation. Just remind everyone what was in it. Give an update on the round one awardees and the status of the actual demolitions that have taken place so far. Round two, we've happy to say we've already kind of started that process as well. And then talk a little bit about the program administration so that you all know that these dollars are going towards the intended purpose of really removing the blight around our county. So, and then lastly, I'll save time for questions, but feel free to ask throughout. So just real quickly again, the demolition program, we've set aside $15 million to focus on removing blight from our communities, as well as allow room for redevelopment. In that $50 million, There's been some money set aside specifically to for the land bank, a very important partner in all of this work. $3 million per year, so up to $9 million over of that $50 million. Another thing, just to be specific, is the definition of what our committee has been using kind of to define, what making sure the applications are adhering to the legislation. So properties need to be vacant, abandoned, and nuisance or blighted. That's something our committee, as we do our review of the different properties that have been applied for, make sure that they fit that definition. There's no more than $100,000 per structure. That's more than enough to tear down a house, maybe some small apartment buildings, but when you start getting to other commercial size properties, there usually will need to be some other money put in as well, particularly if there's some sort of EPA concerns there. In the first round, there was a cap of $1 million per community. And starting with round 2 and beyond, there's a $2 million cap per round. So it's a little small on the screen here, but I hope you can see it in your printouts. But this is really the list of the first 20 awardees. As you can see, it totals a little over $10 million, and this does not include the land bank's $3 million. But we're a total of about 619 structures, and every single council district actually is represented within this list of awardees. As you can see, only a few cities were at that $1 million cap for the first round. Cleveland just under, but East Cleveland, Euclid, Garfield close, Maples close as well. The asterisks signify where the land bank is actually doing the demolition work for the communities, managing that work for them. For Bedford Heights and Shaker, there's kind of a split where those cities are doing a little bit, the houses generally on their own, and commercial properties, the land bank's working on those. So what's the status of this? And this is as of Friday morning. Just to let you know, this data is a little bit fluid. Of the 619 structures, we have 150 proceeds to order, and that basically means at the minimum, all the paperwork is there in order for them to demo the house. For the city of Cleveland, I think that's actually where they've actually contracted with the company that's going to do the demolition. So progress is made in Cleveland. Again, this is as of Friday morning from our database, which the cities themselves update. 42 structures have come down, and many more are planned. I know we have some representatives from Cleveland's demolition group here. But as you can see, we are moving. Just one quick note, we don't have any dollar amounts in here yet because we pay on a reimbursement basis. So we haven't gotten the dollars, the requests for dollars from the cities yet. We have a small request, I think, from the land bank for some of the early stage work that they've been doing with the cities, but we haven't actually gotten the dollars of how much are actually being used for demos yet. So round 2, so the month of May, we actually issued our round 2 application, and this was open to those cities that were not awarded in round 1. We had 3 applicants there. We're making recommendations to the executive on those now, and those were Glen Willow, North Royalton, and Middleburg Heights. So those will are being processed, and they'll work very similar to the round 1 applicants. So of the round one awardees, what's in the legislation is that they need to hit 80% of their proceed orders. Again, that's making sure they have all the paperwork in order, and we want to keep this moving in order to apply for their round two funding. Just last week, Cleveland did submit their round two application. They're the first, and we do expect a couple other of the suburban communities to be submitting their round two fairly soon. People are starting to get everything lined up in order for them to start knocking down these houses. So again, I want to mention a little bit about our program administration, just so again, you know that we are have a good oversight over this program. And one of the things I actually left off right at the beginning is that we have a very good review panel. We have representatives from Public Works, Glenn Coyne from the Planning Commission, as well as some of our experts in the community development group of our Department of Development as well. Really kind of just working together, reviewing this, and making sure that all the applications are adhering to the principles within the legislation. So that's one piece that I didn't even put on this slide. But again, in addition to make sure that we are being consistent and really trying to focus on the legislation, we created some administrative rules that we worked on in partnership with our municipalities as well as the land bank. And this really is helping set standards so that demolitions in Cleveland don't look different from demolitions in Lakewood or Parma Heights. They're using similar standards in terms of, and particularly some to mitigate environmental concerns. So there's some rules in there to help discourage illegal dumping. There's standards on, how to do the backfill, what is included in that, so that we are being responsible as we do these demolitions. In addition, there's some internal procedures and oversights. We actually do, for instance, the bidding has to be done by the city. So we actually make sure we do spot checks and review their policies as well around bidding, make sure they're adhering to those, just to make sure that the money is going as far as it can. I think the bidding helps with that. We have a notification system that, as upcoming demolitions are happening, that we get notified, make sure that they have the right, asbestos checks, making sure that they did bid it properly and are awarded to the lowest bidder. Also, we have staff that actually goes out, especially early on. We wanted to make sure that we had eyes on the ground and we're really making sure that these demolitions were happening in accordance with the rules. We actually have some staff in our Department of Development that has gone out to a majority of the demolitions already, just to make sure that laws are being followed as well as our rules, and that it's safe. The right house. We haven't had any issues with that. We doubt we would. But, we want to make sure that everything is done right. And again, the money is being used in the right way and a safe way. And then, as I mentioned before, we actually just pay on a reimbursement basis. So that protects our money as well. If we find out people are not following our rules or not doing what they said they're going to do, we do have, that as our hammer to get people back in line by not paying them. And one of the things we want to do too, and I think this goes back to what Glenn's doing and your desire for data and like what informs. So we actually are exploring evaluation of the program by a third party. We're just starting the conversations with a couple different groups now to talk about their capacity to review the impact of this demolition program on the county. So what, are we removing the blighted properties? What kind of impact does it have on the home values? This will be a long-term evaluation, clearly, but we could do some qualitative, I think, work in the short term. So. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I know Gus will come up later as well to talk about the land bank portion of this program as well.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. I do have one question. You before we open to the committee, you kind of glossed over the department would want to ensure the money is being used in the right manner. Can you go back and kind of elaborate on that for me? What fiscal quality controls you have in place with the grantees to ensure adequate documentation, and they are clearly adhering to the program compliance, being in compliance with the program?
Sure. Yeah, I think it starts with our administrative rules, again, developed in coordination with the cities, with the land bank, had a training on it as well. So the cities are aware of what our standards are with these demolitions. In terms of the internal oversight of that, we actually have some staff that has gone out to various communities, as well as the land bank, who's doing a lot of this, looked over their policies and procedures for how they bid out projects, how they actually with the checklist, have they is this property signed off? Is it a nuisance? Is it vacant? Is it blighted property? Based on each city's own ordinance. So there's that kind of document review process. But then there's also the alert system. So we want to make sure that we know what's coming, that we know what to expect. So with that alert system, making sure asbestos study was done. So we actually asked for a copy of the asbestos study. We also asked for the actual bidding documents, like how did you bid this? Like show us verification that you bid this out. Again, we want to make sure that these dollars are used to the best of their ability and go as far as they can. Our staff going out and doing the inspection, again, I think the biggest is that we pay on a reimbursement basis. So with that, they have to, municipalities in the land bank have to submit basically completed reports that they demoed the houses. There's usually photos involved. We ask for proof of payment to these vendors as well. So, in some places that's actual, the canceled check or, a printout from their system that showed that, a check was dispersed. So we have all those documents coming as well before we initiate payment to the municipality or the land bank.
Thank you. You also talked about that your staff often goes out and perform these checks with your checklist. Is that a set schedule you have where you just kind of show up unexpectedly? Hey, we'd like to look at your paperwork, or is it something that you work out with the municipalities before going out, and how often is that done?
It varies. So right now it's been a little bit, we've been trying to keep up with as many of the demos as possible because it's really just Cleveland happening right now, and there's not a lot happening. I think later in the summer, it's definitely going to become more of a spot check and more random as more cities in the land bank are demolishing properties. But we have three staff, Paul, that are going out and that are inspectors within our department and know the rules and regulations of the program and seek to verify. We've been in constant communication with Cleveland throughout so far with any items that we might see that or questions that we might have about their demolitions.
Thank you. We'll open up to the committee for questions. Ms. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Surratt, the question is, this is the first I've heard of perhaps a third party weighing in on the impact of the demo fund implementation. Is this a vision for somebody nonprofit coming in or doing us do we have to pay for this? What are you looking at? Is this part of our money that we allocated to demo to now go to some third party? I think it's all great, but our funds are limited. So are you looking to pay somebody to do this study?
We are hoping that we would not have to. We're not looking to pay. These are requests that we're making from groups that it might benefit their own research, so they'll get some sort of benefit out of it as well.
Mr. Brady.
Chairman, Councilwoman Simon actually had the same thing on her mind as I did. Okay, so we're looking for a third party or one or two, maybe one, to do some kind of analysis of how this is going. and we're hoping to get that pro bono, apparently, if we
Yes.
can. Do you, I mean, is it, I mean, this is a public meeting, but I mean, do we know who we're talking about? Are we doing, do we know, or are we looking for what are we looking at?
Sure.
Because I'm curious about if we have identified anybody, who they are.
I think there's the likely suspects here in Cleveland, tell you the truth. So there's Cleveland State case as well, and then the Federal Reserve Bank is another option that we're considering.
Keep it, I'd like to, if there's any news on that front, if you wouldn't mind letting the chair and be aware of it, so we can know that sooner, as soon as you know it.
Yes, we definitely will. Thank you.
All right.
Any more questions? Mr. Jones?
For this third-party study, do you have a set of metrics that you're considering?
I think what we discussed again is very high level. Looking back at the legislation and some of the language, it's helping remove blight, so there's safety and some of the safety issues that come around that. So looking at safety impacts, looking at if there's redevelopment afterwards as well. And I think the other big piece of language mentioned in here is cited for this is spotted demolition helps increase home value. So we're going to look at home values as well. So those are the three kind of big areas. There could be some more specific metrics within there, but I think home values, the actual safety, and redevelopment.
Do you have a target completion date for the study? Is it your hope to evaluate after the $50 million has been allocated, or do you intend to complete the study before to use that information in the further distribution of the money?
Well, one, we don't have anybody engaged just yet, so we can't do anything yet. But I think it would be my hope that we would do some analysis throughout. And once we have some more longitudinal data, then we can really start seeing the effects of some of those, like the safety and home values, like those we can't tell within a couple months of tearing down houses. Those might take some years in order, but what we could do is see if there are plans for redevelopment. We can look at some of the, we could do some qualitative data. Maybe they're surveying about feelings or perceptions of safety in the area. So those are types of things that we could probably do throughout. But long-term impacts, clearly we'll need to see, beyond, probably within a couple of years of since we started the program.
And and the three new applicants for the next round, what were those cities again?
Glen Willow, North Royalton, and Middleburg Heights.
Kind of threw me with that answer. Those are the three cities who are the only three cities that are going into the second round, or just the only cities to this point?
Yeah, those are the only three cities that applied that did not apply in the first round, that were not awarded in the first round. So there were 22 applicants actually in the first round, 20 of which were awarded, and then we just had 3 additional cities apply.
What is the sum dollar amount of those 3 new applicants?
I believe in total it was just under $400,000. The total of those applicants, I think it was $380,000.
For the 22 that originally applied, are you anticipating receiving applications from them from round 2, and what is the status of those applications?
Yes, we do, Councilman. Cleveland already submitted their round 2 for the full $2 million just last week. We do expect, a few other suburbs, I believe East Cleveland Warrensville are two that I'm pretty certain will be applying for round two. The dollar amounts I don't have just yet. I think Warrensville said about what they applied in the first round, so that was about 400,000. I think they will come in around the same. East Cleveland, I'm not sure what the dollar amount is yet, but they did mention their intention to apply again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher?
Awardees need 80% of demolition orders processed before applying for round two. What does processed mean?
So that means, again, for the cities doing it themselves, it usually means they're at the point where they actually have contracted with a vendor to do the demolition. But essentially, to get to that point, and what I believe the land bank uses as definition is making sure all the paperwork is in order. So that is that they have the legal rights to demolish the house through, the city's nuisance ordinance, that they bid it out. They may not be under contract yet, that it's been established as vacant, as a vacant property.
Shouldn't we have that locked down a little bit tighter?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand your question.
Well, I mean, you said based on what the city's determined to be processed, the paperwork in order. Shouldn't we, as the distributor of the money, have that locked down? Because I see here, in reality, if we just go on demolition complete, nobody qualifies from the first round to even apply for the second round. But we're not going on demolition complete, we're not going on a standard. Processed means one thing in Cleveland, could mean another thing in Olmsted Falls. Shouldn't we have that locked down? Shouldn't we have the procedure locked down to make sure that the process, that the demolitions are being completed? Because I only see Cleveland completing demolitions.
Right. Well, and the reason that we, I believe the legislation was written so that as 80% of proceed orders was to try and keep this pipeline of demolition moving. So if we waited for all these demolitions there's certain capacity to do the demolitions. So if we waited for all these demolitions to actually complete, we have to go through this whole process again. It creates a delay then in the actual work
I'm not saying that. I'm saying to process. Process means nothing right now. It means whatever the city says it is. It should mean what the county says it is. And I don't know what we say it is.
And I believe we do. So the land bank does the majority of these. And so they have a very clear definition. I mean, I see Cheryl nodding over there, and she has, I know her process, and it's very detailed in terms of having everything done.
And the land bank handles the majority of these, but
Correct.
we have,
It's Cleveland.
we have five. We have Cleveland, Cleveland Heights, Euclid, Lakewood, and Parma, who may have different definition of process. I don't want to be nitpicky, but if the land bank has a procedure, should we not apply that procedure to everyone so that it's fair and equitable across the board as far as processed for going to round two?
Right. I understand what you're saying, and I believe we do. And maybe haven't been clear in saying this, but there is a minimum. I mean, this is, again, having the paperwork in place saying that you can legally demolish the house. That's our minimum across everything. Cleveland, for their own, I think,
Is that their definition?
Sure. I've got to come up.
Mr. Frangos, do you understand what I'm saying? And I really don't want to stop the process, but I want to be fair and equitable, that there's a standard that allows you to move to the next step, to the next bidding procedure. Do you have something in place that you say, okay, we're comfortable, we can take applications for the next round?
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Gallagher, yes, the standard, I mean, you hit on the point that we were debating when we started the program. It's how do we make sure that everybody who submits around doesn't just sit on their heels and they just don't get get it together. And so now they're already applying for the second round. So we put this 80% figure in place, governed by, to I think answer your question, governed by whether they've submitted what we call a notice to proceed to us. The notice to proceed is just not their, it's not a willy-nilly thing. It is a thing that's based on their ordinances. The problem is that every community, their nuisance abatement order, for example, Brattonall, to declare a public nuisance on a property they don't own, they have a 90-day period followed by a 30-day period to appeal, and there you go. Cleveland has a 30-day, they declare a public nuisance, they have a 30-day, and so whatever that is, some of them are not even governed by a local ordinance, they're governed by the Ohio Basic Building Code. So whatever governs their right to take somebody's property down and the legal procedures necessary for it, that's the standard. So it's not an internal thing with the county, it's not necessarily an internal thing to us, it's a legal requirement. And so the only way that we can make sure that they're on the ball and they're getting their act together is when they come to us and they show, for example, green cards that they've served the parties, that they got service on the party, that they followed their own ordinance. And we make them give them, we make them give us their ordinance and their green cards and their notices and the expiration of their appeal times. And when they give us that and we verify it, if they've done 80% of those on the ones that they've asked, then we know that they're at their completion point, essentially. The only thing left to do is for us to hit it. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I know there's a lot of moving parts here, and it's not easy, but I thought maybe we would have a standard. And now I understand that every city's gonna have different timelines, and it's hard to deal with. But if you're gonna have an 80%, who's watching this? Because it's gonna be confusing for who's ever watching this.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Gallagher, we end up watching it with respect to the ones that we do, because we can verify when they give us their paperwork that they have complied with their own ordinance.
Right.
That's the trigger. There is no one-size-fits-all. So for example, the county can say, we want you to do this, 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 and this, and it may be all well and good, but if it's not compliant with the law, and we risk knocking something down that's not been legally declared a nuisance,
Right.
it's sort of inadequate. That's why the legal standard of each municipality has to be the trigger. The only question then is our ability to confirm that they met their own legal standard. And so that kind of gets into some of the stuff that we were going to talk about. But so like, for example, if we get something in from somewhere, from say Middleburg Heights, and they say we were getting calls initially, people were saying, okay, knock this one down, just go ahead. We would tell them, well, okay, we don't have police powers, only governments have that. You got to do this, this, and this. So when we get their paperwork, we match up their ordinance, we match up and make sure that they've complied with the legal prerequisites to declare a public nuisance under the governmental police powers. Once they were satisfied with that and we verify it, that goes into the bucket of 80%. So if they submitted 100 properties, by the time they apply for round 2, 80 of them have had to reach that point. And if they haven't, they shouldn't be allowed to apply for round 2. So it's an external control. It's not even subject to us. I would suggest that it's even better.
I understand. Mr. Chairman, one more question. Would it be outrageous to have you doing all of these just to have a standard, to have a go-to?
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Gallagher, I'm not sure I understand because each city has its own. Is that what you're?
Why aren't all the demolitions run through you?
Because some municipalities are very good at it, like Cleveland, Shaker, and a couple of others, and some of them just they want to do it themselves. The county has authorized that. If the county would have said no, the land bank must do them all, then we would react to that. But the legislation was such that the county recognized that there are some people that do it well. They like Cleveland, for example, they can do this in their sleep. They know condemnation, they know, proceed orders, they know nuisance abatement law. So there's no fear there. But everybody else, as a practical matter, beyond Shaker and Cleveland, I think maybe one other, we are doing just what you said, we're doing all of them. Because everybody, a lot of people are new at it, it's something that they need help on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I can add just one more thing, we actually have an online database where the cities themselves input the data. So when they do actually get that proceed order, whether it's from the land bank or from the city itself, our system is updated. So there's a universal check there as well. And we do, in our standards, we actually have to have a written proceed order to a contractor is the minimum standard. So that says that all those, the steps that Gus mentioned were complete by those cities.
And that's what I was waiting for you to say. It's what Gus mentioned, coupled with the other things that you all do. You have the contract submitted to the person who's going to tear the property down. You have all the other documents to show that the tests have been done, which is technically the minimum in order to move forward. Thank you for that. We'll Mr. Greenspan, your question.
Great, thank you. The looking at the completions or the status of round one demolitions, I should say. Only about 24% of those structures approved have issued a notice to proceed. Is there a time frame in which, from when the award is granted to the notice to proceed or even the demolition must take place?
Councilman, there is a 6-month window which proceed orders have to be received. At that point, we can start bringing money back.
You can or will. Is it, that's a policy, not part of the legislation, correct?
Correct.
And
No, it's oh, it's in the contract. Yes,
it's in the contract. So it's
yes.
a policy decision, not a legislative decision.
Yes.
Are there appeal provisions that if someone can't get it done within six months, they can appeal to have that 6 months extended?
Yep. Do we have that in? We do. Within the department. Okay. Yes, we do have an appeal process. I think the circumstances could be different in each city. I think in some places we've had some owners that have been nowhere have come out of the woodworks now that they hear that their property could be demolished, and they are tying up a little bit of the legal process for the city to get that ability to tear the structures down.
Okay. And most of my other questions were answered. That's by my colleagues, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenspan. Thank you, Ken. Department of Development, thank you so much. We'll ask that the land bank now come up and talk about the implementation of the program, since we've got an overview of the program administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Gus Frangos. I am here with my team, which is Cheryl Stevens, Mr. Dennis Roberts, and Michael Schramm, and Bill Whitney. And each of them are going to discuss an aspect of the implementation of the demolition bond and the strategy and methodologies that we employ down the way. Just by way of following up with what Mr. Gallagher was asking, that was our initial interaction with the municipalities, all had to do with that first part. We had a meeting at our offices where we had some 20 or 30 municipalities come to do an actual training on this subject, on how you declare something a nuisance, and more importantly, even if they couldn't digest it all, to tell them that this is something that gives rise to, civil rights liability if you go on somebody's property, and takings and all this stuff, and the importance of making sure that that piece of it is right, and frankly, that we were going to have to monitor it in a way that protected the land bank as well, because since we are acting under a color of law, when we knock down a property, we wanted everybody to really get on board with this concept. And I have to say that other than initially, where there was some debugging that had to happen, most of the cities, I think, really stepped up to the plate. We have good documentation now. We work extremely well with the development department. The only reason why we don't have a lot of these demolitions going on is for that reason, because Cleveland probably had 3,000-4,000 condemnations already in the queue, and, we're ready to hit it right away. The smaller municipalities were starting from scratch in like May, June, April in some instances. So, but that you should start seeing a huge influx of demolitions start to take place between now and the end of the year. What we wanted to make sure, and what Cheryl is going to talk about, is the whole chronology of a demolition, to get into some of the questions you were asking, so that you can be confident that everything from the procurement, from EPA compliance, from asbestos, from everything associated with highest and best bidding, is all being done to the highest standard. So Cheryl is going to briefly walk the committee through what happens, the chronology of a demolition. So Ms. Stevens, if you would share that with the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Frangos, Mr. Chairman, members of council. This morning, I want to talk to you, I want to focus on 15 of the 20 communities that were successful in the first round. Those 15 communities entered into agency agreements with the Cuyahoga Land Bank, and so we act on their behalf. Literally, we're an expansion or an enhancement of their staff capacity. My staff talks with their staff on a weekly basis, sometimes more. What we are working on is a process that is before you in this first slide. We, in conjunction with the community that we're working in, we move forward on the first thing was the agency agreement and addendum, meaning that anything under $100,000 as specified in their award from Cuyahoga County, we would begin to work on the process with them. So once the contract was awarded and the agency agreement was executed, we have agency agreements for all of these communities now. The next thing to do was to wait on the contract. And the third thing, and this is the most important document, that's why you see it bolded, is that we had to have the notice to proceed on each and every individual property. Without that notice to proceed, we didn't have the legal right to abate the nuisance. And so you heard Gus talk about, we walked through in April or early May. We had a tutorial for law directors and staff on which sections of the Ohio Revised Code would work on their behalf, and gave them examples of some of the premier nuisance ordinances in Cuyahoga County. In fact, Shaker partnered with us because their law director has worked for 2 municipalities, both Cleveland and Shaker, and so he had a good grasp of what the options in this county are. And so he did a presentation as well on boots on the ground on what it actually takes place on your average community. And so folks who had nuisance language, but it wasn't up to date, updated theirs, and then worked with us on how to make these notices to proceed happen. Why is this notice to proceed instrument so important? Because our history had been at some point in time where we didn't have that formal document that was sent from the community to us telling us that they'd taken certain steps to declare the property a nuisance and authorizing us to move forward and act on their behalf. We got caught in the middle between whoever was the owner and our operations to remove blight. So what this document does is give us authority to move forward. What can stop a notice to proceed from a community is occupancy. If we go out and someone has moved into the property since the community went and did their individual inspection, because we do a new inspection, that will stop us. The lender contacts the city and says that they're willing to take over the property and either rehab or demolish it themselves. And thirdly, sometimes owners begin litigation even though the process had given them a time frame. They come back after the time frame has expired and begin litigation to stop it and do some work on it or reoccupy it. So as I said a few minutes ago, we have 15 of these communities with good agency agreements executed. And these are the process they're going to go through. And I gave you an example that started with the 1st of June. The first thing we do is go out to the community and do a pictorial history of the property. That's known as our level 1 assessment. We expect inspect the interior and the exterior of the property, from basement and foundation up to roof and attic. So we know everything that's in the property. We use that document to help develop all of the other things you see below that. That document is used to help us do an asbestos survey. Our folks taking the photos, those are contractors that we are under 1099s, for example, where they're going out and we see asbestos wrap in the basement. We see plaster that looks like it could be, and we know from the data from the county auditor's website how old the property is. So anything built before 1960, we know will have either some asbestos on the pipe wrapping or in the plaster in the walls. So those are the kinds of things we look at. If there's been rehab and so we see drywall instead of plaster wall, we kind of know what kind of assessment we're going to have. And then once the asbestos survey assessments come out, oh, I forgot to tell you, we're required, because of the size and volume of the number of demolitions we do annually by the US EPA and the Ohio EPA, to do an asbestos survey on every single property we undertake. And so it is not possible for us to not know where there are asbestos particulates in a property, because we're surveying this and studying this. So when we get the survey back, we do abatement specs. And then we bid those abatement specs out, except for where they're small amounts. And we do an annual survey because it's under $25,000 in cost, and that's a small cost allocation. We negotiate annually with a group of 8 contractors, and we rotate through those contractors to do small abatements like 30 feet of air cell in a basement, which doesn't require a huge bid. But on the other hand, some of our surveys tell us there are 18,000 square feet of plaster in a building, and so we'll need to do a bid process for that to see how cheaply we can get it in the marketplace. Then the next thing we do, while the asbestos abatement is being bid and awarded, we're building our demolition specifications. And the specifications typically take us about 5 days. You see a column that tells you the average time it takes us to do the tasks that are part of our process. And then we submit our EPA notice to the Cleveland Division of Air Quality. Cleveland is the only entity that doesn't submit their notices to the EPA, to the Cleveland Division of Air Quality, because that's a conflict. So they submit them to the regional office, which is located in Twinsburg. So then we undertake the asbestos abatement, followed by the demolition, because both companies' names are in the 10-day notice to the EPA entity or its designee, such as Cleveland Division of Air Quality. And they will do random inspections of both the abatement and the demolition to make sure we're doing everything from controlling the abatement to make sure that dust particulates don't flow into the air and contaminate the air around the neighbors, or that no additional soil contamination is taking place. One of my favorite new vocabulary words came from this process, and it's fugitive dust particulates. I never thought of things like that, but putting those 3 words together, it was just humorous the first time we saw it in information from Cleveland Division of Air Quality to control the fugitive dust particulates. We specialize in trying to provide a good site finish. We're trying to make sure that whether we are in the city of Cleveland doing demolition, or we're in Shaker or North Royalton doing demolition, that our work looks good in every community and creates a good standard for the neighbors to live near. And as you can see, we also track, and this goes out to each community to tell them a range of what we're doing. So all the communities will receive this beginning tomorrow. Richmond Heights has already received theirs. It's a little more complicated for one of their projects. Each commercial projects, of which there are, I believe 35 that we're undertaking. I'm sorry, 32. that we're undertaking on behalf of the 15 communities we're working in. They will have separate demolition processes because each of those properties typically have some additional environmental activity. And we may be asked either under dealing with Buster if there's petroleum contamination to do some additional steps, or if we're dealing with Ohio EPA's voluntary action plan guidelines to deal with the environmental issues related to following that process, especially where there's commercial or residential redevelopment, because we encourage the communities to work toward letters of no further action from either EPA or from Commerce via the Buster office. So this is basically what a process looks like in every community, and we follow these details so that within 90 days, if you don't have a rush on it, we can get it down. But when a mayor tells me he wants everything done, or she, quickly, we can cook with some expediency. So, for example, the mayor of Warrensville told us he wanted everything done quickly, and I told him that his folks would have to come in with their documentation quickly. Literally, you were not able to come into us with documentation until May 1st, and Mayor Sellers' staff came in on May 11th with all their notices to proceed. We worked with them to correct any errors on those notices of to proceed, and so by the 20th of May, we had all the notices to proceed for their residential properties, and today their first demolition will take place, and we have 30 properties under contract with them and 8 properties under contract on behalf of the land bank in various communities for our funds. We also know that we have 466 properties that we're going to be responsible for. So we're at different levels in different communities. We have notices to proceed from 8 different communities for a variety of properties, ranging from the cleanup of gas stations, which take more time. They're pretty cumbersome, to small garages where a house was demolished earlier by a lender, and the lender left the garage behind. So we want to clean up that site for redevelopment purposes, or to eliminate a blighting influence in the area. So that basically takes you through what we do on behalf of the communities in our county, and how quickly we can work with them if they give us the information quickly, or if they tell us that we can take some time, we'll move slower for them. We have a staff of 8 working on this, and we are interacting with the county's Department of Development, sometimes on a daily basis, but every week we have communication with the 3 different sets of folks we are working with. The final decisions typically are with Paul and Ken Surratt, but if there is an issue where we've missed or blinked, we're talking with staff in the compliance section as well as the procurement section, so that they are aware of what we're doing it and how we're doing it, and we've given them outlines of our process and how we'll make our contractors work to benefit both entities. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Cheryl. Questions from the committee? No, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, sure, you never cease to amaze me. You always come well prepared. And every time I
that's the
call
goal,
you pick up that phone and you get it done.
To make you have no questions when we're done, that we're taking care of you as best as we can.
And development's taking care of you too, right?
That's right.
They don't
We
give
have
you any
good-
issues.
we have
And
great
we have a
customer
gas station.
service relationships.
Okay. When you have one of those commercial private gas stations, they don't give you problems about cleaning those up, do you, properly?
We work through them.
Okay, absolutely. If you have any problems, you call me.
Okay, thank you.
Gus?
Part of that, part of the purpose of this also is not only to show you the chronology and explain to you that the systems are in place, but if your constituents ask, why isn't this property coming down? How come it's taken long? How come that one went down and this one still haven't? You at least have a chronology there that's sort of telling you, as long as there's no impediments, you can always pull this thing out, and you can know that there is a time frame involved that we can't alter because of US EPA and just bidding and things of that sort. I'm not sure, we did want to talk about just some of our activities and our pipelines and things of that sort. So I'm not sure which direction the committee wants to go at this point.
Well, we would like to, because many tax foreclosed and seriously abandoned properties at some point end up with the inventory of the county land bank. And part of the demolition program, we allocated, like Mr. Rice said, $3 million a year, up to $9 million, to demo those tax foreclosures and properties that are currently in your inventory. And so we'd like to talk about how the county land bank works with the county in the foreclosure process. And for you and your staff to give us kind of, and we have about 30 minutes. I'm sure we can kind of go into some detail about that process and how it works. Because there's a difference between your common bank foreclosure, mortgage foreclosure versus the tax foreclosure process.
That's true.
And for those who are in the audience and those who may be looking and listening online, would like to kind of distinguish between the two and really talk about the relationship between the Treasurer's Office, the land bank, and how you all work together to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. In terms of tax foreclosure generally, there is somebody here from the prosecutor's office. If she would be willing to defer to me, I can do it, or you could, just, okay.
You can come up also in case there's questions or something Gus cannot answer. You're here to help him out.
Well, Miss Miles is in the, she's in the tax foreclosure section of the prosecutor's office, and very much an expert in the field. We've all kind of, gotten to learn in this space because we've worked so closely together, and I can quickly run through an anatomy of a foreclosure and then get into how we at the land bank.
Absolutely, that'll be great. So we like to, we do that, and we start with how does a tax foreclosure start, and very generally, then walk us through the process of a tax foreclosure case.
Okay. Ms. Miles is from the prosecutor's office, and then I can get into our interaction with the county.
Thank you, Gus. My name is Judy Miles. I'm an assistant county prosecutor in Tim McGinty's Civil Division, the foreclosure unit. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of council. The tax foreclosure process actually starts when taxes are certified delinquent by the fiscal officer in Cuyahoga County, who then submits the list of publishes and then certifies the list to the county treasurer for collection. The county treasurer just is a creature of statute that exists to collect those delinquent all taxes, but when they're certified delinquent, they use various standards to prioritize them. Sometimes it's length of time on the delinquent roll. Sometimes it's a request from a community in the county that has deemed it a priority parcel. So they refer several times a year. Sometimes it's more of a rolling referral, with the exception of the collection periods when we don't get as many referrals because of the capacity within the treasurer's office and their ability to work with us to get the complaints filed. So once we get a list of properties that are certified and advertised as delinquent, we then start our own internal research to make sure that we're providing due process notice to the record title holder and all parties who have an interest, either through ownership, maybe some residual potential ownership from maybe an incomplete probated estate, or a recorded lien against the parcel. We then file in one of two venues. In common pleas, we call those judicial cases that will be heard by magistrates. Typically, those parcels are going to be the ones that we've identified as being occupied via the land bank affidavit that either the municipality or very often it's the county land bank that supplies us a land bank affidavit that identifies the status of the property, whether it's vacant lot, occupied structure, or a non-occupied structure. For those parcels that are non-occupied or and not under the identifiable control of any party, or it's a vacant lot, we tend to file those in the venue of the Board of Revision There's a panel that is authorized to hear delinquent tax cases on either vacant lots or non-occupied structures, non-productive structures. That's about 75% or so, I'd say, of the tax foreclosures that we file now. The rest are filed judicially in common pleas. It can take anywhere from 3 months to a year, maybe a little bit more than a year, to go from the beginning of the process when we get the referral from our treasurer, we get title work, we commence with service to all of the identified parties and comply with all of our procedural requirements by Ohio civil rules and local rules to get it in front of one of those venues, either the Board of Revision or a magistrate in common pleas. The disposition of the property is going to be heavily determined by the affidavit that we got because that determines the venue. If someone, if it's an occupied structure or a structure where the case was filed judicially, that's going to be offered at sale. If a land bank wants it after that, they can take it if the condition has changed. It has to be offered at sale at least once, I should say at least twice within a month. It will either forfeit or it will go to a land bank. If it's filed in front of the Board of Revisions, it will typically go directly to the land bank with no sale, with it not being offered at sale, either immediately or after 28 days, during which time somebody who has a lien or an interest can pay off the taxes and take it. But typically that doesn't happen very much. I don't know of any case where it's really happened. So if it goes to the Board of Revision, 9 times out of 10, it's going to go to a land bank. There are very few now that may be offered at sale. I don't know I know that there were some questions about the mortgage foreclosures. I don't know if there were any, if we wanted to talk about those at all, how our tax foreclosures different from those.
So Gus very generally can kind of gloss over that for us.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, to the committee, the essential difference, they're pretty much the same when it comes to judicial foreclosures, except that when you do a private mortgage foreclosure, they do what's called marshaling of the liens. So if there's like 10 lien holders, they all got to get marshaled and their priorities are set up and they all get in line the way, in the order of which their lien appears on the record. With tax foreclosure, it's different. The minimum bid is not, and plus in mortgage foreclosure, there's a 2/3, there's an appraisal that has to take place. The sheriff does that. The minimum bid is 2/3 of that appraisal, whereas in tax foreclosure, the government and the county is not concerned about any of that. They're concerned only about the taxes. So the minimum bid is the taxes. So theoretically, if the terminal tower was $100 delinquent and they absolutely refused to pay, that property would go to sale for $100. That's the essential. Obviously, someone's going to come in and pay that, but just for illustration purposes, that's the dramatic difference. Minimum bid is the taxes only. And then if whoever else is in line, they're basically wiped out at that point if nobody comes up shooting on those taxes.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Miles, Gus, you stay up for me, both of you two. She mentioned that the Treasurer's Office determined which properties are certified tax delinquent. Now, is there some sort of strategy between the Treasurer's Office and the County Land Bank as to to determine which cases to file on? In other words, why do we choose one property opposed to another when some say, well, this property is only behind a certain amount of dollars and this property has been behind for the past 15 years and has accrued this large amount of delinquent taxes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that's kind of the sweet spot of our activity at the land bank because we have essentially 3 or 4 pipelines: Fannie Mae, HUD, and tax foreclosure. There's probably 15,000 tax foreclosures that are eligible in any given year, but there's only sufficient appropriation to do maybe 2 or 3 or 4,000 cases, or at least to tee them up with title work and things of that sort. So Mike Schramm will get into this. in the early years, we all discerned that it's very important to answer that precise question that you asked. I think you worded it in, why do you file in one case and not in the other when you have all these tax foreclosures? And so there is an important strategy, and the Treasurer's Office, going back 4 or 5 years, got together with the County Land Bank and used the Neo-Can-Do system from Case Western Reserve to really place some solid definition to that. And it's a remarkable thing. There's two basic strategies, and one is, identifying the ones that are most catalytic and then making sure those get to the land bank in direct transfers rather than floating around with sheriff sales where you don't know what the outcome is going to be. But I'm going to let Mike get into the detail and the quick history of that. Mike?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. So I'm Mike Schramm. I'm the Director of IT and Research at the Cuyahoga Land Bank, and I'm going to talk about how I work with the Treasurer's Office to prioritize candidates for the tax foreclosure process. About 3 or 4 years ago, we met with Mike Sweeney from the Treasurer's Office, and the big concern was, let's send properties through the tax foreclosure process that are land bank eligible, because if something is not land bank eligible and gets exposed to sale and then is not sold, it resorts to state forfeiture, which is just a limbo where there are, sales, lots of trafficking in bad properties, $300 bids. And by the way, in a tax foreclosure that goes to the land bank, the county recoups its tax foreclosure costs. When something is sold at a forfeiture sale, those costs are not recouped. So there is financial reason for the county to pick the best candidates that are land bank eligible to travel through the tax foreclosure process. And so we use the data coming from the Neo-Can-Do system at Case Western Reserve University to scrub the delinquent tax portfolio and prioritize it for those cases that make sense for a given year. So the first cut is it land bank eligible? And to go to the city of Cleveland's land bank, it needs to be a vacant lot. To come to the Cuyahoga land bank, it needs to be a vacant residential structure. And so that immediate cut of the data determines land bank eligibility and whether or not it's going to go through the fast track Board of Revision administrative process. And then the second priority is almost a geographic scrub using our spatial analysis capacity. The first geography we look to prioritize candidates in are what are considered to be tipping point neighborhoods. Those are the areas that if blighted properties are not addressed with immediately, the neighborhood could go either way. And research done by the Federal Reserve Bank as well as by Nigel Griswold indicates that if you acquire a property in a tipping point neighborhood, you get the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to demolition. And there's also the chance that you can rehab the property. We have an extensive rehab arm at the Cuyahoga Land Bank where we can plug in properties in the tipping point neighborhoods into renovation. The second priority is there are a lot of existing community and economic development priority geographies in the county. So Cleveland Neighborhood Progress is their strategic impact initiative. The city of Cleveland has economic development priority areas. And then we're coming off of the Neighborhood Stabilization Program funding round 2, the NSP2 target areas where there were target areas established. Let's get properties through the system that overlay within existing strategies that are already out there, where there's already existing dollars and prioritization. And then the third strategy for sending properties through tax foreclosure is what we like to call our aggregator, which is a spatial analysis tool. We know that in a lot of our neighborhoods in Cleveland, as well as in some inner ring suburbs, you have vacant lots or vacant structures that are adjacent to other publicly owned vacant structures or vacant lands. And in certain neighborhoods, you have, hundreds and hundreds of 40 by 120 lots. What we do is dynamically dissolve all those lot boundaries and say, if we take the tax delinquent properties that touch those aggregations, we can actually grow them for development in the future by referring properties that are tax delinquent to foreclosure that are next to other existing land aggregations of publicly owned land. So that's basically the strategy for sending properties, making recommendations to the treasurer on how to, on which properties to send through tax foreclosure. So land bank eligibility and then some geographic scrubs based on either market typology, target areas, or land aggregation growing.
Thank you. And Gus, you come up. You mentioned that you guys had previously met with Treasury and most recently Mike Sweeney. That strategy that you talked about and what the gentleman just mentioned, is that the strategy that you all continue to follow even now? Or has it been some deviation from that? Or talk to me about it. Has that process continued that way?
Mr. I guess there's two ways to answer it. One from a data standpoint, and the other I can talk about it from what my understanding is. But Mike, why don't you start us off?
From a data standpoint, we've been submitting candidates since either 2012 or 2013. Most recently in May, we submitted 1,800 candidates. I believe last year we submitted 1,500 candidates. But looking at the data, Ms. Miles talked about the land affidavit process, which is the kickoff to a tax foreclosure beginning. And in the city of Cleveland, the Cuyahoga Land Bank does all of the land affidavits. And then if a suburban land bank doesn't want a given property, we also do those affidavits. And in 2014, we did a little more than 2,000 land affidavits, which we inspect the property to determine occupancy. And 75% of those affidavits we did in 2014 came from our batches, our recommendations that we're submitting to the treasurer. So far in 2015, we have done a little under 1,000 land affidavits, and only 45% of those land affidavits came from our batch. So that's what the data basically shows.
So all that is to say is I'm not 100% certain. I mean, I do know that this is a good system. It was a good system. It has had some blips. We've had a lot of changeover in county government from Treasurer Sensenbrenner and then several treasurers after that. And so maybe some of that disparity is coming from that. I'm not certain. But all I can say is that it is a critical piece. You know, this is something that we do need the treasurer. We depend on the treasurer to take the batches that we give, and we give the treasurer some 1,500 batches a year, maybe more. And so what we should expect, if the system is still in place, is that you get roughly 70–80% of those back in the form of a tax foreclosure. So anyway, to answer that precise question, I can't positively say. I would like to say that that is the system and that'll remain the system because that produces the highest and best results. I guess, you know, I mean, if you take a property and you take some other property, or you take a property and you don't direct it to a land bank and you just sell it, intuitively that might sound good, but are we really doing the county a favor in that? Because you collect once and you don't know what happens to the property after that. Some people put lipstick on a pig and that's the end of it. With the land bank, you know, when a property comes to us directly, we know precisely what happens to it. It either gets demolished and you eliminate blight, and all the studies show that there is a multiplier effect on the tax base, or it gets rehabbed. But it gets rehabbed the way we can all be confident and proud of, because we create the spec, we make sure it gets done, and we don't cut a deed until it's done. So this is a really important, as the president of the land bank, this is a very important strategy that I would hope remains, because it's good.
So thank you, Mr. Frankos. Mr. Brady?
Thank you very much. I guess to Gus or whoever you might want to choose, you had mentioned a little bit about 15 minutes ago that there were about 15,000 properties, abandoned properties or foreclosed properties in the county. You want to just briefly refocus on that? How many properties are we talking about? And
I'm guessing, it's kind of anecdotal, it's in the thousands, it's more than 10,000. I'm talking about just eligible properties that could go to tax foreclosure. That's everything from occupied, unoccupied, and of course, our space is unoccupied, abandoned, distressed properties. Mike, I mean, what would you guess when you do the batching?
Right,
how
right,
many
right.
are out there?
So, there are, this number changed last week because collection just ended and I haven't gotten the updated tax delinquency data, but, there are approximately 37,000 delinquent properties in the county, but tax foreclosure has already begun, or there's Board of Revision appeals on valuation, or, really the universe to start new tax foreclosure, I believe, and I'm just taking a wild guess because I don't remember the last time I created a batch, it is usually ranging between 15 to 20,000 new ones that you can start in any given year. So that is the universe, where the rest of the balance of the tax foreclosure is the world of value challenges, and cases that have already started or are in the process and have come to the land bank.
I mean, that was the number initially from Mr. Sweeney years ago, and that was the whole point of, well, let's start trying to be, smart about what we foreclose on, and that was back then the number 15. It's the same, it's right
see.
around there.
Mr. Chairman, well, I'm just trying to get at what I think is one of the places where, the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in terms of the county's responsibility to work with the land bank and to be as effective and strategic as we can about how we go about this. And is there a methodology between the treasurer's office? I know there's been changes, quite a few actually, over the last several years since the land bank came into existence. Is there a methodology between the treasurer's office and the land bank as to which cases, given that there are so many, to file on? In other words, why file on one property as opposed to another? If you want to help me out with that.
Mr. Chairman, to Council President Brady, that I can say that strategy has been implemented going back several years. It has had some dips, up and down, but that strategy, yes, there is a reason why you should foreclose against one as opposed to another, because as Mr. Schramm said, some of them will create aggregations, some of them are suitable for tipping neighborhoods, others are in very distressed neighborhoods, but you want to purposefully aggregate, and so there's a reason why you're going into a neighborhood like that. And then, what we do in this spatial analysis is we take all the CDCs and we incorporate that into Mike's filters. So you're seeing not only the initial, scrub of is it land bank eligible, but you're seeing, Detroit Shoreway has this as a target area. Harvard, has this, particular area that they want to focus on. Mount Pleasant is doing that St. Luke's thing. And you wouldn't know that. The treasurer wouldn't know that unless these filters that Mike uses are embedded into the research. And so you see all that at the front end. So then when the treasurer gets a property from us, there's a real reason behind it. And so what has happened over the last 4 years, the laws have been significantly changed, because up until the change in the laws, the treasurer's hands were tied. He basically had to foreclose, and the treasurer would usually foreclose on amount of delinquency and the time that it was delinquent. Maybe sometimes there were some differences in terms of whether something's occupied, homestead, and things of that sort, to protect seniors and things of that sort. But strategy, even if the treasurer wanted to impose a strategy, couldn't until the laws were changed. Now the law, our legislature in Ohio has unshackled the treasurer so that the treasurer can now start thinking long-term versus short game, and that's the term I use. The laws were changed to embed community development into tax foreclosure where it never existed before. So those things, my advocacy would always be, those things we should use every single enablement to the max when it comes to vacant and abandoned properties.
Well, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Frangos, I mean, the treasurer has more authority than they used to, and but is this happening? Are we this is the new administration. We have, you know, we've got a new treasurer. You know, are we taking advantage of the authority that we have? What more can we do? What should we be doing, in your opinion, or someone else's that you think is knowledgeable? What can we do in the county, in the treasurer's office, to help with this process?
Well, as I said, we've had a lot of changes, so I'm not positively sure on a policy level if the strategy is always the same. The strategy, when I say meaning, they receive Mike's batches, and then those properties are primarily foreclosed upon for direct transfer to a land bank. If that's what we're talking about, yes, it's happening. I don't know to what extent it's happening. I mean, if you go back to the previous interim treasurer, for example, it was articulated in a letter. It went out to every CDC, and everybody precisely knew, at least on paper, what the policy was. Short of that, you know, we just have the data to go by. You know, the data right now is showing that batching and that process resulting in direct transfers. I'm sorry, what was the number, Mike?
So we went from 75% in 2014 of the properties we did affidavits on came from our batch, and it's now 45% of the properties so far in 2015 that we're starting the process on by doing the affidavit have come from our batch.
So I'm not sure if it's a policy change or a blip or a short-term refocus on certain other things. There have been, the prosecutor's office itself has dabbled into certain areas of like Metro Hospital and Cleveland Clinic. So I mean, I suppose the best thing would be is to ask the treasurer, let the treasurer, you know, indicate to everybody, you know, what's the current policy? Do we still have batching? From my standpoint, if we don't have batching, I would just tell Mike to do something else. There's no need for him to batch and do all this high-level research if we're not going to use it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just on this, I know have a limited amount of time left, but you know, I would like to see us work together on this, and you know, but possibly you know, have a committee meeting where we when we're ready, when the administration's ready, and maybe the administration looks like it's ready right now, to discuss this, focus on this.
And Councilman, I think that's a great idea. I actually stepped out for a little bit to see if I could get hold of Treasurer Murray. Unfortunately, he can't make it to this. It wasn't on the agenda, so he wasn't prepared to come up here, but because he is the Board of Control. But I agree. I think a separate meeting.
That's where I should be.
Specifically addressing this, I think, would be a great solution. That way, I think the treasurer and Gus can also talk and try to distinguish what happened with those the changes in those numbers from the 75% to the 45%. I think having that initial conversation, I think, will be a great start that we can then have a more detailed conversation about this.
I agree, and I think you're coming up and sharing that with us. So we will plan for a future committee meeting to really deal with this issue here. I had questions that I posed to council staff about this that they really couldn't give me an answer on, and while I had the folks in the room, we wanted to make sure we asked that question here. Opposed to me trying to call and get a meeting and talk with them. They're in the room, so I asked the question, though it was not on agenda, but I think it goes hand in hand dealing with everything else we're doing here in the county as it relates to housing, the demo program, et cetera. So that's why we decided to ask those questions while we had the folks here in front of us. So we will work with Treasurer's Office of Development, the Land Bank, and council staff to make this a discussion for another committee meeting. But I also think it would be important that, you know, we work together before that to try and find some kind of resolve or see what the issues are, what the concerns each side may have, and moving forward. So thank you. Finish with your question?
Yes, I am finished. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions? Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Jones?
No.
Well, Mr. Frangos, thank you so much. Thank you to the rest of the Land Bank staff, Department of Development. Always a great job. We are now finished with our presentation as it relates to the county property demolition fund. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Absolutely. Madam Clerk, any miscellaneous business?
No, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just referring back to our original earlier presentation, and my line of questioning was really around the 59 communities and Cleveland in particular being part of the county planning, their study. I'd like to encourage the commission to reach out to the city of Cleveland and see if there are any opportunities to partner to better align in those efforts. And I know we have one Cleveland City Councilman here, Councilman Tony Brancatelli. I don't know if there are any comments he'd like to make or any thoughts or.
Absolutely. Come on. We have a few minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's getting late. Noon, they make us buy lunch for the rest of the committee members. So, certainly I appreciate Director Coyne's comments and the presentation he made, and any opportunity that we have where we can look at working with our Director Collier and Councilwoman Cleveland, who chairs the commission meetings, and then I chair the Development Planning and Sustainability Committee. There is a significant amount of information, as he stated, that we're already working on that has all the different typologies in our neighborhoods. And certainly a lot of the points that he raised were spot on. When we talk about out-migration, as the council president talked about, we've been talking about sprawl for years now. And quite frankly, our city of Cleveland is no different than any other major metropolitan area. We have as many people moving out of here as they do in Boston, New York. The biggest difference is what's being backfilled. And I think they started to talk a little bit as they're looking at the study on the typology of the housing, what we can backfill with. We've certainly heard reports over the years through folks like Professor Tom Byer and others that our typologies don't match what the housing market is. When we talked about whether it's single-family detached, whether it's townhouses or any of those types of housing, certainly in the niche markets like downtown and others, you're starting to see those types of housing units skyrocket. But as in New York Times this past Sunday, there was a piece around we have to be careful on what the housing bubble is in certain markets and certain typologies. If you hit those different beyond what you can absorb, we don't have those same kinds of adjustments we may have when you have a more stable housing market. If you're looking at different neighborhoods, you're going to see that supply and demand change. So, there's a lot of components to it, and certainly, as Frank Ford did in his study to Harvard about what rehab looks like and what's going to take to rehab houses versus what was stated earlier about the land assembly and where we can build new markets, where we shrink those typologies down. I think that's very critical, Councilman, as we talk about our department's meeting with the county and looking at the study and how we overlay that information. So the land reuse strategies are critical as we assemble land, how we reuse land, and good planning is certainly needed. So there's a lot of components of that we would be happy to be engaged with.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, any other public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Frank Ford.
Mr. Frank Ford?
Thank you. I'll be very brief because I know that we're short of time. Frank Ford, I'm Senior Policy Advisor with Thriving Communities Institute. I'm also the chair of the Vacant and Abandoned Property Action Council, which is known as VAPAC because that name is so long. I believe that we sent to all the members of council a study that VAPAC released in March on tax lien sales and tax delinquency. And because some of the topics came up today, I just wanted to put on your radar that there is some information in that study that may be useful to you. We'd be happy to give a presentation. There are two things in specific that I wanted to raise in light of the comments that came up in the last 15, 20 minutes. One of the observations we started looking only at tax liens, and we began to realize that tax delinquency is really the greater problem, that residential tax delinquency had doubled in Cuyahoga County from 2009 to 2014. But one of the observations, and it's similar to what Gus Frangos mentioned, that the state law was changed to enable the county treasurers to embed in their thinking a community development perspective. And I think it's our observation that the treasurer, I think, has been slow to embrace that. There's the traditional view of we're about collecting taxes, and that's the main thing. The community development view, as Gus said, takes the longer term. It's not just about collecting the revenue, it's about protecting the tax base of the county. And you have to pay attention to these vacant properties and what's happening. And one of the concerns is, are our properties going to sheriff's sale that should be going to the land bank? That's just one thing I want to put on your radar. The other is something we discovered as we were doing the study that was pretty striking, and nobody knew it. The number of prosecutions, tax foreclosures, that the county prosecutor can do is about 2,200 a year. It's remained constant because of the number of staff that they have. Yet, starting in 2009, we all wanted them to do more board of revision for vacant property. That was a new tool. Those went from 500 to currently 1,700. That leaves only 500 left to do judicial tax foreclosure. If you graph this out, and it's in our study, you see the two numbers, BOR and judicial. Judicial starts up here, I'll put it this way, at like 1,800, goes down to 500. BOR starts at 500, goes up to 1,700. So the capacity of the county prosecutor to do judicial tax foreclosures is greatly diminished at a time when, as it was quoted, we either have 37,000 total parcels, or as Mike Schramm said, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 that could be prosecuted or tax foreclosed. And I guess I don't believe that, I'm not sure the county council can do anything directly about increasing the staff of the prosecutor's office, but I think it should be put on someone's agenda for discussion. So that's it. I just wanted to raise to your attention that there is a study which we could present to you.
Absolutely.
There's 0 seconds left, so I won't do it now.
Thank you, Mr. Ford.
Thank you.
We will, I'll have council staff reach out to
Okay.
you, and we can talk
Thanks.
about that. Thank you. All right, seeing no more items on our agenda, this Community Development Committee meeting is adjourned.